Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, is not buying the official narrative that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. And now, he's demanding that an investigation into his brother's death be performed. You would think that they would have already had an investigation such as this inside of the prison system. But one thing we have definitely established since Jeffrey Epstein's so-called suicide is that the prison system is an absolute and utter dumpster fire. So why should anybody believe their narrative about what happened in that jail cell on that night or his previous so-called attempt at suicide? Nobody believes their narrative, and nobody should. Cameras not working, guards sleeping, guards changing information on their forms, a whole entire shit show. So I don't blame Jeffrey Epstein's brother for calling for an investigation into his death. I believe that that's a family's right. If somebody is to die within federal custody, well, I think that at the very least, the family should get some answers on how their loved one died, even if their loved one is this sick bastard Jeffrey Epstein. But in the infinite wisdom of the boobs who run the Justice Department and the Department of Corrections, there hasn't been a real investigation. Oh, sure, we've gotten some promises from Darth Barr. We've gotten some platitudes, and we've gotten some long-winded reasons why this happened. But we have no proof. We have no evidence of what happened in that cell. And Jeffrey Epstein's brother, well, he's demanding some answers now. This article is from the Daily Mail, and the headline, Jeffrey Epstein's brother says pedophile financier was murdered and demands an investigation into his death after coroner ruled it a suicide. The author of this article is Marlene Lenthang. Jeffrey Epstein's brother is insisting that the pedophile financier was murdered and is demanding an investigation into his death after a coroner ruled he died by suicide in jail while awaiting child trafficking charges. And even when this happened, Jeffrey Epstein's brother, who is another not decent person in my opinion, came forward and said, we believe he was killed. We want an investigation. And they went so far as to bring in Dr. Michael Baden to take a look at the autopsy. And Baden came to the conclusion that in his opinion, Jeffrey Epstein died by homicide, not by self-strangulation. And we know that the official narrative runs counter to that. So again, it all comes down to this. Who do you believe more? Mark Epstein says he does not believe his brother committed suicide in his Metropolitan Correctional Center jail cell on August 10th, citing how 3 bones in his neck were broken in an unusual fashion. And that is what really concerned Dr. Baden, right? The neck bones, the hyoid bone, and how they were broken. And according to Dr. Baden, that is not something that you see when you kill yourself the way Jeffrey Epstein supposedly did. That is something that is much more common if you're violently strangled. I believe my brother was murdered. I want to know what kind of investigation they did. I have no indication that there was one, Mark Epstein said to The Sun. They said the cause of death was pending. Just 5 days later, they said it was a suicide, he added. And again, not a big fan of Mark Epstein by any means. I think he should be investigated for, at the very least, his financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein. But at the same time, I don't believe the government should be denying family members of deceased people who died in federal custody an investigation into the circumstances leading up to that death, especially considering Jeffrey Epstein is such a high-profile inmate, and it would behoove not only the family, but the entire nation and the case to get the facts out there for the public to see. But we've seen Darth Barr and his folk be very resistant to this. In fact, we see that it got to a point where they just want us to believe that because Barr saw some video footage that, well, we're supposed to believe whatever he tells us. We're not supposed to search for any more answers, and that's the end of it. Well, that doesn't cut it, okay? That might have cut it in the 70s or the 80s or something, but nowadays that is not going to cut it. With the internet, social media, and how connected everybody is, you're not going to be able to pull an end around on people anymore. It's not people, see, before it was people standing around their water cooler at work chopping it up for their 15-minute break about the going-ons of the world. Nobody had the time, nobody had the resources to pull up a computer in their house, pull up a web page on a computer in their house and do research for themselves. So we were stuck eating whatever narrative was shoved down our throat. But those days are over and people are not buying the bullshit anymore. Especially now, after they've locked us down in our homes for so long, people have sat around and they've taken the time to pull the curtain back and take a look into the dark, disgusting room that all of these cockroaches inhabit. And when even just a little bit of light gets blasted into that room, these cockroaches start scurrying. The New York City medical examiner ruled Epstein's death as a suicide by hanging after he was found with sheets wrapped around his neck. He died 2 weeks after he was placed on suicide watch at the jail. And again, it's all of this stuff that leads up to his death. In just a vacuum, him committing suicide, I would have believed it a lot more if it wasn't all of this other stuff leading up to it. The Tartaglione stuff, the camera's not working, the guards falling asleep. How could you expect anyone to buy this? This is the kind of shit you would see on a movie on the Paramount network at 2 a.m. If I hadn't researched this stuff and been following this from the very beginning, and I had just woke up today and somebody put me on the scent of this case, I wouldn't believe any of this shit was possible. But here we are. Smack dab in the middle of, in my estimation, the largest cover-up in generations, perhaps ever. Dubious of the results, Epstein's brother hired pathologist Michael Baden to oversee the autopsy. Baden says Epstein died of homicidal strangulation rather than suicidal hanging. And it makes sense, right? Obviously. I am not a doctor. I'm just your average run-of-the-mill moron, to be honest. But when you start digging into it and you start looking at the effects of homicidal strangulation and then self-inflicted strangulation, it's pretty easy to see where Dr. Baden comes up with the theory that Epstein did not kill himself. Because there's a lot of evidence out there that goes to that point and proves what Dr. Baden is saying here. So I am much more inclined to believe what Dr. Baden has said in this autopsy, considering all of the evidence we have around it, than I am to believe what the federal government is telling me. Attorney General Darth William Barr's investigators also concluded that Epstein took his own life. Well, that's a big shock. But Epstein's brother insists the probe missed key evidence. Yeah, of course it did. And even if they didn't miss the evidence, they have enough egg on their face, Darth Barr and his band of goons. What are they going to do? Admit this huge F-up at the MCC where they let Jeffrey Epstein die on their watch? Hell no. Much easier, much better to put a bow on it and just say he killed himself. But what they didn't expect was for all of the questions to be asked and for people not to believe the narrative. And that means people on the right and people on the left. I know ardent Donald Trump supporters, who believe that Bill Barr is playing loose with the truth, especially in this situation. Folks, Bill Barr isn't a new guy in Washington, D.C. All right? He's been around forever. He is the swamp. So I don't know how people can have any faith in Bill Barr to do the right thing. I have never liked the man since his first stint back in Washington, D.C., and I certainly do not like him now. I hired a very well-respected forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, who was an expert on people being killed and the deaths being written off as suicide to make an independent evaluation, Mark revealed. There were 3 broken bones in my brother's neck. Dr. Baden says when you hang yourself and your feet are dangling, you are likely to break bones. But he says he has never seen 3 bones broke in the kind of soft hanging that supposedly killed Jeffrey, he added, and I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Again, I'm certainly not a doctor. Average, run-of-the-mill moron. But it makes sense that if you hang yourself from, say, a beam or, some sort of thing, something that's suspended high up in the air, you're much more likely to break those bones, right? Because of gravity and the impact. But if you're leaning off of a bunk bed and you're leaning forward to kill yourself, how are those bones as likely to break? These are all logical questions, all logical positions that you would think that the legacy media would be digging into, but they're not. Epstein's legal team voiced similar suspicion over his death, noting he had a bail hearing coming up and had agreed to be on house arrest and to pay for armed guards to assure he remained in custody. Well, that was never going to occur. And remember also, he talked with Doug Schoen, the lawyer from Atlanta, about coming on to help with his case, and according to Doug Schoen, Jeffrey Epstein was not suicidal. We've covered that article previously in the catalog, so if you want to go back and check that out, you can find it. But the fact of the matter is, nobody said that Jeffrey Epstein was suicidal. Nobody at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The disgraced financier's death was a huge blow in the investigation into his child trafficking charges, where he was accused of procuring underage girls for his rich and powerful friends and himself. Epstein's former girlfriend, co-conspirator, fellow child abuser, all-around scumbag, and confidant Ghislaine Maxwell, 58, was arrested on Thursday in New Hampshire on 6 charges of sex trafficking and perjury in connection to the alleged trafficking ring. She's previously denied all wrongdoing and faces 35 years in jail if convicted. Mark Epstein has refused to comment on Maxwell's arrest. Oh, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he has. I'm sure his lawyers, buddy Alan Dershowitz or whoever else is advising him, is telling him, keep your fat trap shut. Say nothing. Because if this takes the turn the way I think it's going to take the turn, and we end up smack dab in a RICO case, Mark Epstein will most certainly be a target of interest for his financial ties with his brother. A source close to Epstein says Maxwell's life may also be at risk now that she's in custody. She will be very guarded, but I won't be surprised if she dies and it's announced that she's killed herself, the anonymous source said. Oh, is that a veiled threat, perhaps? Of one of someone close to Jeffrey Epstein? Who exactly is close to Jeffrey Epstein? Alan Dershowitz? The Core Four? Darren Indyke? Kahn? And Brunel? That's probably the extent of it, right? So who was it who came out and said this? And what is the true meaning? Because as I always say with these people, it's not what they say, it's what they mean. And we have to read between the lines. Every single time a statement is made by any of these people, we must read between the lines because they are all engaged in all sorts of manipulation of the narrative. The source also revealed that Epstein had threatened before his arrest that he had damning information on his rich and powerful friends, including President Donald Trump and former President Bill Clinton. Well, we know for a fact Epstein was engaged in a blackmail scheme, okay? I don't think that's even up for debate at this time. And the people who are still debating that are people who really don't understand the case, and they don't understand the broader implications of this case. This is not just about one man involved in sex trafficking to fulfill the disgusting needs and desires that he had. This is an intercontinental cover-up involving multiple intelligence agencies, multiple powerful people involved in politics and elsewhere, and academics, business moguls, and other powerful people who continued to hang out with this man even though he was arrested and convicted the first time around. These are the people that are now trying to distance themselves from Jeffrey Epstein. These are the people that we're not going to let get away with it. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that pertain to the podcast and the article can be found in the description box. All right, everybody, we'll be back later on with some more.